Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last event in the classroom of the day, I believe. Congratulations on making it here. My name is Danielle Aubert, and I'm here with my friend David Reinfurt. We're going to talk about our two interrelated projects today. And the format is going to be we'll each talk a little bit about our projects, and then we'll have like space for discussion and like Q&A about them. So I will begin with talking about the Detroit Printing Co-op. So downstairs in the Duplex is an exhibition of materials from the Detroit Printing Co-op, which hopefully, if you haven't gotten a chance to see it, please go check it out. So the materials in the exhibition are like 80% of them, 90% of them were printed at the co-op, and they have this label on them, which is the union bug, which was the way that I was able to tell like what was printed at the co-op and what to sort of like consider. So there's also a few materials that preceded the co-op, and then a few things that are after the time of the co-op. But this is the union label that appeared on everything. So the Detroit Printing Co-op was printing like in the 1970s, from basically 1970 to 1980. It was organized by a number of people, but the sort of founding kind of key members were Lorraine and Fredy Perlman, pictured here. And they were kind of like leftist anarchists. Neither of them was from Detroit, but they kind of ended up in Detroit and set up the co-op with the intent of printing things that were like difficult to get printed otherwise. So Fredy himself was actually trained as an economist. He got his PhD in economics in Yugoslavia. So he kind of was trained in like socialist economics. And then after that, moved to Western Michigan University, where he had a visiting assistant professor position, which lasted for 2 years, and then sort of was like dissatisfied with academia and moved to Detroit and founded the co-op with a group of people. So downstairs, there's one of the vitrines has a lot of materials from Black and Red publication, which was like a student publication that they put out, or a publication that they put out with students. They called it sort of themselves the Black and Red Gang. And it documents things like clashes between students and campus police that were taking place at that time. So they had 6 or 6.5 issues. Here's an example spread from one of them. So you can sort of see, like in this example, they were using word bubbles to sort of show to criticize like the business school faculty, accounting faculty, management faculty, and they were like definitely making this connection between the university and sort of the promotion of just like capitalism or sort of capitalist interests, and then trying to be sort of critical of that, but also the connection to finance and things like that. So this is happening like in the late 1960s, around the same time as there's the uprisings in France, in Paris, May 68, but then also sort of uprisings happening everywhere. So there's like people protesting against the Vietnam War and a bunch of other things, but this is also happening like in Kalamazoo, Western Michigan. So a couple of the things that they printed also were this document on the left, which I put copies of this downstairs. Not this one, this is also very cool, but I just reproduced this because it was just a 2-page document. And I don't know exactly who made this. I mean, it was like the group of them, but on the one side, it's like initiation rights for students, and then on the other side, it's initiation rights for professors and administrators. And it's basically sort of talking about the level of control that's happening on university campuses. And then this pamphlet, which is sort of amazing, which I think about a lot, because I teach at a university, was a recounting by Fredy Perlman of basically getting kind of pushed out of the economics department at Western Michigan University because he was too radical, or considered too radical. So he's complaining here about both the conservative people on the faculty, but then also the quote unquote liberals who like pretend to be supportive, but then actually are also trying to push out anybody who like doesn't share their beliefs. So in 1970 or like 69, Fredy and Lorraine and some of the members of Black and Red moved to Detroit, and they opened the Detroit Printing Co-op. Basically, they bought they got a used offset printer, borrowed money to put it into to like rent a space in Detroit, got other equipment, and then they had this like list of rules basically about who could use the co-op. And so I'll just call attention to this part. The equipment of the printing co-op is social property. It is and shall be controlled by all individuals who need, use, and maintain it. It is not and shall not be owned or controlled by any individual or group of individuals, whether they claim to serve, represent, or speak for society, whether they are elected or self-appointed. So in other words, anybody could use the co-op as long as they kind of agreed to help take care of the machines. And it was also sort of explicitly not-for-profit kind of a arrangement. So I guess I've just sort of been reflecting, like in this current moment when the university is being targeted as this site of like indoctrination by the right, they're also critical of the university from the left in this time. But it's just sort of like interesting, and maybe I'm like overthinking this, but it's interesting to think of them setting up a co-op after being basically kicked out of a faculty department, and kind of being like, okay, I'm gonna go from this bureaucratic organization to this like completely horizontal structure at the co-op. So they also did have to organize themselves and make some money because they had to take on debt in order to purchase some of the initial equipment. So they did printing for groups in Detroit, for people around the city, and then they had a price schedule that they set up. They could do basically 4-color printing, although they didn't really, like some of the people had experience printing, but some of them, like Fredy Perlman, actually didn't really know how to print, so they would mix colors kind of a little bit haphazardly. And then you can also see it's an old machine, so it didn't really register very well. So they could kind of offer services, but they did print a lot of materials over that 10-year period. Like a big client of theirs was the SDS, Students for Democratic Society. They printed, and there's a whole vitrine downstairs with Radical Americas, and so they printed like almost all the Radical Americas from 1970 to 76, so it was like coming out 6 or 7 times a year. They also printed the first English translation of Society the Spectacle, and that was the main translation in English that was circulating until the 90s. And they printed probably like, that was sort of required reading in a lot of art schools, so that got distributed a lot. And then, Rebel's Voice was a student newspaper from Detroit students. Wartime Strikes was like another user who was part of a group that was had ties to Trotsky, Leon Trotsky. So that was also in Detroit, like in the 1950s, connected with CLR James and Grace Lee Boggs. And so he kind of reprinted a bunch of stuff at the co-op. So there's sort of a lot of interesting material that they put out. Also, other groups came in, for instance, and printed this pamphlet about a like unauthorized wildcat strike at a Dodge truck factory in Warren, Michigan. And then like Unions Against Revolution is just like, they're actually very critical of unions. So they have the union bug, but they're very critical of like the bureaucracy of organized labor. So they were sort of functioning pretty much till 1980 when they lost their lease, and then, or the person who owned the building sold the building, and then they continued to publish some materials through Black and Red. And so there's some of those books are in the bookstore here, actually, if people are interested in looking at those, but the co-op closed. So that's where I will stop, and I will pass it to David to talk about our related project.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Okay, this may seem like a radical departure. This smells like capitalism to me. Anyway, this is a book that was published in September 2019 by Inventory Press. It came out of 10 years of my teaching at Princeton University and out of around 3 classes. And Inventory Press first came to me and said, we think what you're teaching there might make a good general purpose book. And but I didn't have any bandwidth or desire to write a book. And so we came up with another idea, which was to speak the book. In a series of, we set up 3 days of events in Los Angeles in the former Richard Neutra studio, and I gave 6 lectures a day. They were 45 minutes a piece. There were 15-minute breaks in between. Adam, who was sitting there, was playing music on a synthesizer in between. It was really fun. There were juices, and anyway, everything that was said was, there were juices, yeah. And everything that was said there was video recorded and then transcribed. And so the idea was just to speak the book into existence rather than writing it. And then, of course, that transcription was a mess because we talk in circles. And it took a lot of forming and rewriting, but the book came out. And that came out, what's maybe relevant here is it came out in September 2019. And there were events and things to promote the book afterwards. And by February 2020, I was set to go to do something in Italy for the book. But it was not a good time to travel to Italy. And then at the beginning of March, of course, the students went home for spring break, and then we never came back for quite a while, and it turned into remote instruction. This is a follow-up book to that first one, a co-program for graphic design. This one comes out of the period of remote teaching. So as I think probably lots of us had various views in, either we're teaching during that or taking classes during that period. And as I was attempting to figure out how to do it, it became really clear I could have visitors from all around the world just join the class, and that seemed very productive. It was also a time to kind of rethink, to have many more voices in the room besides my voice. And so it was quite a rethinking of how I was teaching at the time. And after doing it for a little while, so here was my Zoom setup in the studio. I went to my basement monastic studio on Lower East Side in New York and sat there with a teaching setup, something like this. But what was wonderful was to be able to talk with many other people and have them run the classes. One of those people I invited, so I could invite whoever I wanted to. So I invited Danielle to come to a class and talk about the Detroit Printing Co-op. Her book with Inventory Press was relatively new at the time, yes. And so that's where that happens to be where these projects join up. I should say that a co-program for graphic design comes out of the remote teaching. It's 3 new classes, but instead of performing the book and transcribing that performance, this was, when you're doing it on Zoom, there are already transcripts. So we use those as the kind of basis to craft this book into something else. And the result is a book that's more polyphonic, like lots of voices which are not mine on the page. And it eventually, we're turning it back into I'll say something. We're turning that back into a very low-key performance tomorrow afternoon for 12 hours at 38 Ludlow Street in the basement, where where Danielle and many other people who contributed to the book will be reading the bits that they contributed in my basement studio, and that will be from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. tomorrow. So please come for 12 hours. There'll be juices. Anyway, so we'll end here on the printer bug and the apple.
So what we wanted to do now was have kind of a conversation, so we can have open it up if there's questions from from all of you, and if you think of something to ask, you're welcome to join us up on the stage and then stay with us up on the stage when we ask it. But to begin, we were going to ask each other a question. So.
And I'll just add to that for one moment. Our goal is to get as many people up here as possible. Mm-hmm. If we could empty the room, wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, that'd be great. So everybody comes up, everybody asks a question, or you can ask a group question. But I just would love to see the room empty and the stage full. But please. Okay.
So should we start?
Yes.
Okay. So my first question. So I will also say. So I visited the other kind of correspondence a little bit is that I was working on the co-op project. While I was teaching it for a year at Princeton, I had sort of started that, and then when I came back to Detroit, that's when I really got going on the project. And then 2020, when I visited David's class, which actually, like, a lot of Zoom visits, I forgot that I actually did that because Zoom, like, all looks the same. But I remember, like, rereading the transcript and being like a lot of working on that project has been sort of learning, like, facts that are related to the co-op and then kind of, like, revising those or, like, learning new information and kind of incorporating it. So I read my own transcript and was kind of like, I can't believe I said some of that stuff is wrong. But the question I wanted to ask of you is about the titling, a co-program for graphic design, because obviously the co-op is the co-op, but I know that you thought a bit about what to call this, and so can you talk a little bit about how that came to be, like the title?
Sure. Yeah. It took forever to get to settle on a title. When I proposed this book to Inventory Press, I suggested the title was a reprogram for graphic design because that's what it seemed relevant to me. It was just kind of a reconsideration of some of the assumptions that I surely had made before. But that was not going to carry the weight of the book the right way. And so then we went through months and months and months, or years, how long, forever, of like tossing titles back and forth. And we eventually landed on a co-program. And the like the word I like best with it is cooperative or cooperator or co-op. So that's a nice overlap with Danielle's project, of course. And but it could be collective. But the name is just indicating that it's a project done by more than one person and explicitly like at the same time. And I would make a distinction between cooperate. Doesn't stand for collaboration, or I wouldn't suggest it does, because collaboration and cooperation, I feel, are two different things, and I'm much more interested in cooperation, where the individuals are bringing their own expertise or whatever, their own interest to the thing, and having some agency in what they do, rather than collaboration, which for me, I mean, this is maybe not very defendable, but always feels like it's emerging. It's emerging, and I'm much more interested in like cleaning up the press when you're done with it. Mm-hmm. Taking responsibility for what you're doing, and then putting two things together, they add up to something else.
And I feel like that's also, I'll just say, with Fredy Perlman and the co-op, they were also very like adamant about not being labeled as socialists or anarchists or anything. Like, and so they were really trying to create a space where everybody could do their own thing and not be like there was no party line, So they were kind of like really allergic to that. And the thing, there's a quote from Fredy Perlman that the only like ist he is a cellist because he played the cello. But but I think so. I think your kind of understanding of co-op, matches it away with what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of the printing co-op, the roles are so all the work needed to reproduce your opinion, is manual work, and you take care of it and you clean up and you organize yourself to get in there. And I find that like working side by side in parallel, like quite a beautiful model. Like I aspire to that.
Yeah, there's another just quick anecdote, which was from some of the high schoolers that were in there, was that they all had to contribute to designing Radical America because that was like the big sort of paying job, but the high schoolers couldn't do the trimming at the end because they could mess up the entire thing if they did it wrong, and also they were too small to like pull the weights. So
brilliant. I would love if there's a question from the audience, an observation. Yeah. But can you?
I really don't want to. No, this is your.
But it's also for the recording.
We don't have a mic, unfortunately.
First, Danielle, I want to thank you for writing the book. It's beautifully researched, and it filled in so many holes for me about the co-op. And I'm curious, based on that, so many of the publications that they put out, particularly in the early 70s, seem to be about trying to save the left from itself. And I wonder, when you were speaking to people, did you get a sense of what kind of impact they had on people in the left in Detroit?
Yeah, so if everybody could hear, it was about sort of like what kind of impact did they have on the people on the left in their publications. And so I think that First, I think it was like they actually had pretty national distribution, especially with Radical America, because that was a national publication. And then the way that people would get their books would be the black and red books, but then also the other books was through like a publication list, you know? So like you would order the books, and so they were for sale around the country. It wasn't just in Detroit. And in fact, sometimes I had the feeling like they were more influential, like nationally than locally, because when you talk to people around Detroit, people knew the co-op, like they printed there, but I think a lot of the people they were speaking to were actually probably other leftists, like other people already who were members of the left. I mean, and I think that it's hard to necessarily like summarize about everything that was printed there, because there's the black and red materials, which I was able to track those because Lorraine Perlman is still in the Detroit area and she had saved a lot of the materials, but there were other groups that came through that I still find out about. Like people will see the book and then they'll be like, oh, here's this, here, I printed there, or so-and-so printed there, and like, so, and that we didn't record, like I sort of didn't get them in time for the book. I shouldn't say that happens a lot, but it also happens that I talk to people who think they printed there. They're like, I remember going to some place, and then they'll like name the street, and I'm like, that's not, it was some other place you printed. But so I think that I mean, I don't know. It's hard to. I mean, as a member of the left, which I'm sure a lot of people are. It's sometimes like hard to like assess, you know, like if it's really just people talking to one another who already are in agreement, or how much it's actually kind of getting out there. Because the thing is, they resisted any kind of like structured organizing, you know. So they're publishing these things and getting them out. It's hard to assess like how much that's changing the way people are thinking, or kind of what impact it's having without something like numbers, like being like, oh, there's this organization that's growing by X amount of people. The Society of the Spectacle, you know, obviously had a huge impact. And some of the texts were only available, you know, because they translated them. Like there's some obscure texts on like Marx's theory of value, or you know, that were only available in like Serbo-Croatian until they translated it. But I don't know how many people really read those. I don't know if yeah, I'm looking at Maya, because Maya and I worked on this for a bit together, and I don't know if you have any other thoughts about the impact, but please feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds right. I feel like a lot of people, because I would copy books at the bookstore in Detroit, and a lot of people weren't familiar. At least, like,
Yeah,
you know,
they
weren't
would.
really familiar.
They hadn't seen them, yeah.
Yeah. But they were also outside of like the art, like scene in the world at that time. It seemed to be, like,
Yeah.
so.
I would ask people like at Cranbrook, like, did you know about Fredy Perlman? But he had like no connection to other printers, or no real connection to other designers or the art scene. He was just sort of putting stuff out. So, okay, the next person though should come up. Will you come? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a tendency to like ramble, so there might be like 4 questions in here. I'm Rebecca, by the way. I interviewed you for my undergrad like years ago, so it's nice to see you. Okay, so what is my question? I think my question is related to kind of like applied practice. So it sounds like you're both friends, and you've been kind of invited to speak in your class, and that's kind of like a thing that we do when we teach, and it's kind of it's lovely and it's wonderful. But I think what I'm really interested in is like how you think of this idea of like cooperation in a kind of more formal structure, whether it's like in a workplace or in the academy, like maybe what that means to you too, specifically, and then whether you have kind of an example of a model of a kind of studio or a school or someone kind of a group of people practicing today that you find to be interesting and inspiring and kind of productive within kind of the current context that we're living in, which is like very fragmented, very online, et cetera.
Yeah, great.
That's my question.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll address. So one model of a place that I think of when you suggest that is like a art institution in Ghent, Belgium. I happened to visit recently, called Kunsthal Ghent, and it's It is state operated, like they have the lease on the place as a 15th century church by virtue of the city government. And the person who runs it, Valentine Goethals, he was concerned that they wouldn't be able to keep the lease and do a substantial program over a number of years. So what he did was he invited in many, many other groups to take on the building, which was way too large for what they needed to do. And he gave them all keys, and he gave them all an equal role in how the institution plays out. And I found it pretty inspiring to see that because of the amount of activity that was going on, but also the direction that he chose that as a way to make the institution have a larger impact without just growing one particular vision. And so it's practical, but just having keys and being able to let yourself in and use the place and build in it and open your shows and do whatever was inspiring.
That's cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe there's another question.
No, you should stay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, please. Please. Thank you.
Now? Okay. I guess I'm curious about how, with in the case of Danielle and this project, which took up a lot of your time and energy for many years, two questions. One, how does it relate to your own design practice, if at all? Or how does it relate to graphic design in general?
If at all.
If at all. And then I guess kind of the opposite question for you almost, but what, did you learn anything about your own work or how you think about graphic design through through the act of speaking the lectures and then revisiting them as text? Was there something that kind of came out of that for you that was particularly surprising?
Yeah, I will just say with the co-op work, I think that Fredy Perlman was not a designer, but to see somebody who's not a designer but then got really into the practice and the print through the machines was I mean, I don't want to say it's inspiring, but it kind of was, it kind of made you think about the form. A lot of the formal decisions that he was making, for instance, using universe type or Times New Roman type had to do with what printer balls were available for the typewriter that they were using. And so he also kind of developed these idiosyncratic approaches to typesetting where he would be instead of doing italics, he's going to make it a different typeface, something a different typeface. So I think seeing somebody who's just sort of and then the other sort of anecdote is that he would use he didn't know initially about CMYK as a color separation, so he just separated the colors differently. He had a dark blue and a light blue, and then he was this works. He was talking to some other printer. He's this looks really good, and the printer was you could just do CMYK also as a color separation, and so I think that seeing that kind of experimentation makes you just kind of, that was sort of nice to think about, to bring it back to my own kind of work. But also I really think a lot, especially now, about just the print, the tactility of print and how that brings people together, brings you toward the project in a certain way that, we miss.
Okay, and thank you for the question. So you're asking what I gleaned from reading the transcripts and putting it back in. I mean, a couple things stand out. One was, and in the moment I thought this also, I was so impressed with how much the students brought to the table, and that sounds overly romantic, but the students were absolutely present, and I could hear it in the transcripts. And so the energy that they brought into that thing, and I think it's something about seeing all the squares on the page, on the screen, there's an equivalence that's not there in a classroom situation when you're at the front and there's students not at the front. And so, and it really felt more, frankly felt more equal. And I could see that in the transcript with how much the students were speaking. There are no student voices in the book, and that was a choice, for a bunch of reasons. I'm not sure what they are, but intuitive choice, I guess. But yeah, so I think the other thought I'm left with doing it is how condensed writing is.
Mm-hmm.
And so working my way through these transcripts, like I like doing rough editing, like where you're just kind of finding the main ideas that you want to pull out of something much longer, and it's remarkable how long a spoken transcript is for someone who's not dealt with it before. And what a mess. And then I cringe to hear my voice. It's horrendous to read it on a page. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, do we have anything else we should talk about?
Yeah, thank you. Come on up.
But we don't have, no, we should do another chair.
You can sit here and maybe I'll just. It's good.
Okay, I'm gonna think out loud for a bit and maybe it'll form a question. But thinking about how in the co-program, the Detroit Printing Press section appears under the section circulation, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just kind of thinking about how the printing physical media was a necessary prerequisite to communication at the time of the printing press, and now it seems that you can't help but communicate now.
Mm-hmm.
I guess just what analog do you see to a Detroit printing press or somebody that helps elevate kind of, I guess, otherwise censored voices today when we're asked to do nothing but communicate with each other?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question, and I just don't have a good answer because I think that it's such a different moment. And then I was actually rereading this text this morning. Also, that I think there should be copies of this downstairs, but this is something that Fredy Perlman wrote about, like just trying to tell people basically to think beyond the bounds of your imagination and anything is possible and everything. And I think this kind of long form tract is just not. It's just not possible to share right now. But at the same time, so at the time when they first opened the co-op, it was also because things were literally censored. So there were texts that you just couldn't print and distribute. But yeah, I just don't know. I mean, maybe somebody else has a thought about this here, but I feel like right now it's just there's so much overload that you don't have it's just a totally different moment for that format, So, yeah. I don't know if David, you have yeah.
Okay. I mean, so that text is in the circulation class, and that's a class that Danielle originated at Princeton, which is great. And in fact, I remember one assignment from that class which had to do with leaving. Let's see, how did it work? Leaving the note under the.
I think the assignment was you had to insert something. It was a very benign assignment,
yes.
But it was something insert a message into sort of existing circuits. But it had this very, it was somebody left a note ended up leaving notes in their dorm that then caused this whole uproar. And then you realize, oh shoot, you have to be really careful with assignments.
Fiction.
Yeah.
But anyway, it makes me think in response to that question and the kind of saturation of media, the analog nature of that and the small insertion, the small little gesture, seems like a pretty useful way to break through.
Mm-hmm.
So it was entirely fitting that anyway Danielle came back to that class since starting it. But they're always networks that aren't exhausted. I mean, we know all the familiar ones and the emerging ones or whatever. There's always something, whether it's from the past or just another new way of doing it, to circulate information where you can give it just as much form. Yeah. Yes, Manuel. Great.
We can bring up a chair too.
Okay, so my question's for David. you said that you had like assumptions that you developed with the first book, and that with this yellow book, the new book, you're revisiting.
Yeah.
Could you expand on what those assumptions were? And in the context of it being like a kind of pedagogical textbook teaching graphic design, you know, what changed about, or what were the changes about teaching graphic design, you know, that, you know, changed for you, I guess?
Assumptions is probably pretty fair. It's what I said, I guess. But anyway, I'm sure it has everything to do with like the centrality of my voice in the first book. You know, I've always approached teaching, or I've tried to approach teaching in a way where I want to evacuate that seat at the front of the room, and it's remarkable how much how difficult that is to do. And so on Zoom, that was much easier. And it's really easy to bring in a bunch of voices, and then that could be like the substance of the book. So I think in the first book, it was my voice talking about other people, right? And in the second book, it's much more of other people talking about what they're interested in some relation. And so the assumption just has to do with like the relevance or importance of my voice or a singular voice. Does that make sense? Does that answer it fully? If you can push me
Is there
harder.
a form for that?
Yeah.
Like that makes sense, like a kind of conventional form that, you know, one's a more individual, authoritative voice versus something that's more.
Yeah, the second one has a second typeface, but I mean that's but seriously, and that's for when other voices are speaking, which is very much of the time, and then there are also extended quotations, which are so it's the text has a much more fragmented quality, which mirrors the structure of what I want it to be, which is like coming from, many people producing it. Each text tends to be like one visitor, or it's not like one text will have many people usually. But yeah, like that.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Maybe there's another question. This is.
Did you each design your own book?
Oh no.
Oh yeah. Yes, I did design that book.
Adam Michaels designed, or Adam Michaels and crew designer.
Do we have, anybody else like to come up or join us up here? We can pull up some chairs too.
Yeah.
Or please bring a chair. Yeah.
I don't know if I have a concrete question, but I'm interested in this like back and forth you're having between like writing and performing and like retransmitting content, and you're doing this reading tomorrow as a kind of performance of a lecture that already happened, and like obviously there's some built-in temporal quality to that. Just curious about the why, and maybe, I don't know, the scalability of that. Like, do you feel that that has more potential to grow, or I don't know, I'm just curious about like why the retranslation over and over again, and like what do you think is like what's come out of that so far, maybe?
Yeah, well, I can kind of, I feel like that's happening for sure with the co-program for graphic design, but also with the co-op materials. I think like as a designer, like interested in this material, I was like, you're like, you don't want to make something, I mean, you're going to make something new, you're assembling all the stuff into material, but then I would also like really appreciate the thing. So then actually I just like copied this one, you know, just like reprinted, and then the other thing was also reprinted, but then in the act of reprinting, I mean, I spent like 4 hours at the like machine reprinting, you know, so then you're really thinking like, what am I doing here? But also it's like as you're doing that, you kind of re-engage and like recommit to the material, and you look at it in a new way. I mean, and then we were sort of thinking about this with the installation earlier this week, how it's like there were a couple of people that painted the bug on the wall, and that was like a big project. It took them like, I don't know, 6 hours or something, that they, you know, 2 people working the whole time. But then it becomes this like, you're just looking at everything so carefully that then there's this, you know, you're just then it was like they were joking that they were birthing their baby. You know, they were like, our baby has been born, the bug. You know, but I feel like because it was just like such a labor. But I think that like that act of copying and retransmitting kind of is just a way to kind of reconnect, re-engage with the material in a sort of productive way. But
I think that's, I mean, what Danielle is saying resonates for me. That's very much how I would think about it. It's like the passing back through of your body of that information and the reprocessing, the rethinking about it. The fact that, you know, if it takes 2 hours, if it takes 2 days rather to paint a logo, that's what you're thinking about while doing it. And so so that's interesting to me. And then also I'm a formalist, like, and not joking, you know, like I care about form and I care about the form of how something is said. And so I'm gonna always be as interested in that as I am in what's being said. And that I'm sure comes from my disposition as a designer, but I don't think it's trivial. You know, I think I think that's important. And so.
Yeah, but that it is a good. It's an important like question because also in your book and the research section you sort of talk about like design research and how that's sort of similar to and different from like let's say like academic or like written research. But that act of like taking an image and then just like reproducing it in a different way, and thinking of that as like a form of research is sort of also I think important as you know from the design side.
That big apple on the screen was made by Enzo Mari, Italian designer, in the 60s, and he spent a year painting this thing. It was up on his wall, very big print, because he wanted to make like the perfect apple. And I think about that like meditative, like also the like body of this like big thing that you're painting and all the thoughts and what that produces in doing that.
Also, just to note, because of the painting of the bug, I was also just thinking about how it says abolish the wage system, and it was like wage workers painting the bug, you know, and I felt like non-union, like one of the people was non-union at least, so I was, you know, and but it was kind of like it was just hired for the, you know, to help with the installation, but I was like thinking about like this sort of back and forth of like having an exhibition about abolishing the wage system, like in a context where obviously everybody has to get, you know, is trying to get paid. So, yeah, I mean, I think, and then, yeah, you just think of those things because of that act. So, okay. Do we have any other questions? And please come up. Now there's a lot of people up here.
Yeah,
so.
we're achieving. Yes.
All right. Hello. Hi everyone. Danielle, there's a question for you that this is probably in the book, but I admittedly have not read the book in a few years. But I'm trying to remember with Fredy Perlman and the Detroit Printing Co-op, the things that immediately sort of stood out to me in the first place were those pieces that are kind of almost like a really lo-fi, like Bradbury Thompson, like sort of like the stuff that's like overprinted, like different color plates kind of intersecting or kind of not quite intersecting or kind of rotated, or all these kinds of bits of experimentation with the printing process. And I do not recall, and I'm wondering how much of that kind of, how intentional, what was the thinking that was going on there? Like, was that sort of, was there being this element of play as part of just like printing pamphlets? Was that like self-consciously a means of kind of having less alienation in the production process? Like, what was there really sort of deliberately, self-consciously anarchist underpinning to that play as part of making those things?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I think that, like, looking at those things, those were the materials where I was like, to Maya's earlier question about what does it have to do with graphic design in a way, like I was like, is this graphic design? Because he's not, a lot of the later materials are just very straight, not that they're not graphic design, but they're just very straight up, like just text. But then some of those early things, he was playing with a lot of color, and I thought, okay, it is design. I mean, even if it's not, he's definitely intentional, clearly, but that one of the documents you're talking about is actually, it was like, Revolt in Socialist Yugoslavia, 1968. It was like a very kind of like dry content. I mean, it's not that that's dry content, but it's kind of like, it didn't have to be like fancy printing, but he did kind of like overlay all these colors. And so I think he was just learning to use the machine. So like every time he would print, he would like kind of learn to use use it as a way to like see what the machine could do. And according to Lorraine Perlman, he just really enjoyed the graphic. I think it was like he was not alienated. It was not alienated labor for him. But then I think when I look at like the production over time, I think it did become alienated labor for him. I think he stopped being that interested because you see a lot of color, a lot of like experimentation and like weird stuff with typography in like the first 2-3 years. Mm-hmm. But that's like me too. Like I just lose. You're like so into something for like 2 years, and then you're like just trying to finish the project because you're like interested in some other thing. And so he kind of like, he sort of changed and got more into like novel writing and like doing other, like writing these kind of like revolutionary novels. But like, so yeah, so I think that it's totally a function of just being like, this is fun, like it's not work. But then if we talk to other Detroit printers from that time who were familiar with them, they were like very critical of the work coming out of the co-op because they were like, it's bad printing. So.
And was there, do you know if he had much knowledge of like early avant-garde approaches to typography or design, or that was just a different kind of well of like of experimental thinking than the political side of it?
I actually don't think he really did. He was into like William Blake.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, you have to. No, you should. You have to come up. Come. Come on. No, come, Natasha.
We can't hear you.
Yeah.
So it's more, you just said, Danielle, that he was playing with the machine and that was the output. Do you see any relationship between that and your Excel project? Like you were playing her Excel book that she did 100 years ago, but you were playing with the program and that was the output?
Probably, but that's I feel like we don't have to diverge.
No, but, I mean, just like, or is there something about you as a graphic designer?
Oh, yeah.
Where the source is actually what is the output, like that the source, like the machine, or the kind of programming is what it looks like in the end. So he didn't actually. He was just playing with the machine, and that was what was happening. He was not like making that happen because he liked how it looked, maybe.
Right.
And I think with the program in Excel, like the output was just you messing with what the machine was allowing you to do, and so you didn't actually touch it. I mean, is there something about like what you're interested in like graphic design, like that output is like very untouched by you as like, I'm gonna tweak this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the machine, the visibility of the machine is definitely attractive. I think that's like also, like, I don't know if it's a generational thing, but I think our generation of designers was very interested in this sort of like process thing where you're like, you can see like what's coming out. But I will say the difference with Fredy Perlman is the content was also very like, it's very like incendiary, it's like revolutionary content. So like, in let's say like my cases, I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna do these drawings in Excel of like flowers, but like Fredy Perlman was like writing these kind of, things calling for everybody to like walk off the job and
Right,
like,
but the forms were like coming from the same place. Like he was actually not really, like the form at the end. He wasn't aware of like the references that we are aware of. Just not.
I mean, the other thing that he did a lot was he would drop in photos that were not captioned, that like I had to use a lot of like Google reverse image search to figure out who they were, because they would have been portraits of people that was like, now I'm gonna forget the name, but it's famous from that movie about the atom bomb, but it was like there was somebody that was like the creator of the atom bomb, but like that would have been a recognizable photo, like that guy was recognizable. But like when I was looking at it, I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but why this guy keeps coming back up. But so he would drop in all these photos that kind of functioned as part of the communication. Like you were supposed to understand, like read the text that way. So. No, you have to stay. Do we?
I have to go.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, please come up. Yeah, okay. You can come make your.
No, my comment is really about the DIY nature of the printing co-op juxtaposed with the necessary do everything yourself of the graphic designer now, right? And like the pleasure and the slowness of the DIY where you're you know, is it design? I don't know, I'm cutting this out, I'm putting it down, versus like I have to master Motion, Web, Illustrator, right? And do all of these things and repay my student debt. I have two students of mine who graduated recently up here. God bless you. So it's just that relationship of the, I guess it's the kind of seduction of like reso printing right now. Yeah. Students love to reso print, right? And you just said something like, but is that graphic design? So like how do you enter into the professional realm with a body of work that brought you pleasure in its slowness and tactility and all of that kind of thing, which comes from this world where you're dealing with texts that mean something to you, you know, with distribution channels that mean something to you. And then maybe this question is for you too. And Brooke, you're in here too, right? Hi. Like they've spilled out of grad school into the market now, right? So is there a way to merge these things, I guess, is my question. And also, I mean, you sort of skirted the question about what this has to do with your own graphic design practice, right? But we who teach, like sometimes the practice is the teaching after a certain point, right? Anyway, I'm not sure there's a question in there, but.
Yeah, I think that, David, do you want to?
I just had one thought.
Yeah.
So just one thought, which, oh no, we lost.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, I'm good. Okay.
I'll look like I'm
very good. Okay, very good. Very nice. Anyway, one thought is just the DIY, the same impulses that would lead somebody to like pour lots of time into perfecting a reso print or working in the print shop, working in an offset print shop or doing whatever. I feel like you can approach anything that way. And so, you know, you can use whatever softwares, but you don't have to master them. Or you can also like find some other way to make peace with these things. And I guess I find like it's completely possible to do something like this at different speeds. Sometimes like really fast and chaotic is productive. You kind of don't do it too perfectly. You just go full speed, just do it and kind of don't worry about it too much. Or alternately, like dragging something out and making it ridiculously long. And so I just feel like those are ways to resist the kind of productive impulse that the industry would make of you and still do the work and still keep yourself moving. You know, it's like you want to answer to yourself rather than outside conditions because that's what's going to keep a practice vital. Is that?
Yeah, no, I think, and it's a good observation because I think that actually I hadn't really thought about that before, but how their desire to have all the means of production and everything lined up, like all the typesetting equipment, etc., is actually pretty similar to like my feeling even in doing this whole book, where I was like, if I'm going to do a book, I have to be able to write it, you know, get all the scans, clean the images, you know, and sometimes you're just like. You know, and then design it, print it, etc. And I feel like there is something very seductive about being able to do that whole thing, but it's also limiting because you're like, you know, that's a lot of labor. But they were really thinking about these questions, I think, in their work because they were like, they were expressly trying to not be profitable, you know. So they were like, they don't want to be like driven by like wage concerns or like by trying to print more faster. So like there's this kind of like slowness and like impracticality to what they were doing.
Did they ever take in commercial work that was like not part of the left, you know, like advertisements, menus, you know, the kind of thing that
Some people tried to, and then I think they couldn't really produce very good results. But they were working closely with actually, like, especially at the beginning, another print shop that was out of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which was like this sort of revolutionary. It was like a sort of group of black workers within the union movement, and they were trying to be commercial at a certain point, but then also it just couldn't make it happen. But I saw a business plan for them where they were like, we're going to print all the stuff for like the left, and then we're going to make money. But then little did they know, like the whole print industry was about to collapse.
That's like we're going to design books for art museums, but we're going to do branding and wayfinding.
Right on the
Yeah.
side.
State capability brochures, everything.
I think
Yeah,
we're at time. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 7:00. Thank you.
Thank you all for, yeah, thank you all.
Thanks.
Yeah, all right, thank you.